The words of President Trump at the White House today during today's Medal of Honor ceremony for the late First Lieutenant Garland Connor from World War Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division in France. On January 24th, 1945, as German soldiers were approaching, Connor raced from his headquarters job onto the battlefield to direct artillery firing.
He ordered fire on his own position, exactly where he was, courageously choosing to face death in order to save his battalion and achieve victory for freedom. He had shells dropped right on him. Aim at me, he said. Aim at me.
Connor's widow, Pauline, who tried for years to get her husband this recognition, was at the White House today to receive the medal. It comes 20 years after her husband's death. Well, thanks for your service and sacrifice. Thank you for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. Don't forget Thursday this week, big debate down in Florida. The Republican governor's primary, the gubernatorial debate.
To my office and sit down and talk.
No, I'm asking you right now.
Will you please come to my office?
Are we supposed to sit at the back of the bus?
Oh, that was weird. Good evening, everybody. I'm Martha MacCallum, and this is the story. Congresswoman Maxine Waters now facing growing calls to apologize or resign. Republican Congressman Andy Biggs has introduced a measure calling her out for, quote, endangering their lives and sowing seeds of discord, saying harassment or violence is not a form of protest. He joins us live with what he wants to see happen in moments. Also tonight, there are protests outside an event for Attorney General Jeff Sessions in Los Angeles this evening.
As Sessions, you're not welcome in our communities, and there are people who will fight back, and when we fight back, we win!
And on the sidewalks outside of Trump foreign policy advisor Stephen Miller's Washington, D.C. apartment, it looks like this, complete with wanted posters accusing him of crimes against humanity. All of this ramped up by some in the media.
For Republicans to act like Maxine Waters has taken the discourse to a new low is just factually inaccurate.
As a matter of fact, the president calls for more violence than anybody else.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders, for example, is one of the most powerful people in the world. And in a very real and tangible sense, the defining feature of a free society is that you can tell one of the most powerful people in the world in your government, get out of my restaurant.
But the top Democrat is Senator Chuck Schumer, is urging a little bit of calm on this whole thing.
No one should call for the harassment of political opponents. That's not right. That's not American.
Delaware Senator Chris Coons is a Democrat who agrees with that. He's also a member of the Judiciary and Foreign Relations Committees. Senator Coons, good to have you here. Boy, that's an ugly introduction. There's a lot of messy stuff going on out there right now. How do we stop this?
Well, Martha, there's a great tradition in Delaware. At the end of our political campaigns, opponents, Republican and Democrat, who've run against each other, often in very spirited campaigns, meet in Georgetown, Delaware, the capital of our southernmost county, and they literally bury a hatchet together in the beach sand of our Atlantic beaches. I've tried to bring some of that spirit here to Washington. I do have strong and vigorous debates over policy differences with the president, with some of my colleagues across the aisle. But tomorrow morning, I'll begin Wednesday, as I do every Wednesday, with James Langford, my good friend who is co-chair of the Senate prayer breakfast with me. We'll be holding hands in prayer and listening to my friend Johnny Isakson, the Republican senator from Georgia, as he shares with us about his faith journey. Something I've learned here in the Senate, Martha, is that it's a little bit harder to throw a punch at someone on the floor if you start the day holding hands with them in prayer.
Yeah, no doubt. No, that
I think
sounds
that's a spirit we could all
I think that sounds like something that everybody can get behind. But, obviously there are issues that have gotten us here, and the discourse in the country is very ugly across the board. The president, though, seems to believe that Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi are the face of your party, and that the more they do this kind of thing, the more he likes it. According to a tweet that he put out, the face of the Democrats is now Maxine Waters, who with Nancy Pelosi have established a fine leadership team. They should always stay together and lead the Democrats who want open borders and unlimited crime. And that last part really goes to where this most recent dust-up has come, from the border issue and then today from the travel ban.
Well, Martha, to be clear, I'm a Democrat, and I don't want open borders, and I don't want more crime. In fact, I've co-sponsored and voted for bills in the Senate that have made dramatic increases in investment for border security. I do think these two issues, immigration and the president's so-called Muslim ban, have been very divisive, have brought a lot of passion.
Yeah, Senator, let me jump
to
in because we just have limited time. You know, why have the president put out a deal that would have allowed 1.8 million DACA families to stay in this country. He wants a wall, and I think Americans are disgusted really with both sides of the equation right now. Why can't Democrats come to the table on that issue, and why are they going to so many divisive tactics to make it look like this is, such a heartless move when they're not willing to do what needs to be done to fix it?
Martha, to be clear, a bipartisan group here in the Senate, led by Mike Rounds, former Republican governor of South Dakota, now a senator, a bipartisan group spent weeks working hard on a bill that offered $25 billion in investment in border security to see the president midway on getting Dreamers that path to citizenship. That was the bipartisan bill. It got 54 votes here in the Senate, but it only failed because the president personally lobbied against it the day that it came to the floor. We've had some challenges negotiating with the president because he'll initially say, I will accept a bipartisan bill that does A, B, and C, and then when we get that bill to him, he'll say, no, I reject it if it doesn't have E, F, and H.
Republicans and the president would say the same thing about the other side. But, would you stand shoulder to shoulder with the president in the White House and sign a bill that you could both agree on, or is that a picture that Democrats never want out there before the midterms?
Earlier today, Martha, two different Senate committees voted out two different bills that are genuinely bipartisan, and I've worked very hard on. The Foreign Relations Committee, a bill that I've moved forward with Bob Corker that the president supports and where I hope to have a bill signing on it that helps us spend more private capital in the developing world, less government assistance. And then in the Help Committee with Senator Rubio, Republican of Florida, a bill to help improve savings for college for American families, and in particular first-generation college-attending students. I'm eager to find substantive ways that we can work across the aisle and fix the problems that actually affect working Americans. I'm hopeful we can do that in immigration as well.
I think there are a lot of people who are hopeful that both sides can figure out, and it really ought to be able to be figured out in terms of some kind of deal. Andy Biggs, who's a Republican from Arizona, I'm going to talk to him in just a moment. He believes that Maxine Waters must apologize for these comments that she made, saying that you can tell Republicans that they are not welcome anymore anywhere. Do you think she should apologize or even potentially resign?
Well, I'll remind you, at the top of this story, you had Senate Minority Leader Senator Chuck Schumer saying that nobody should be using harassment or threats against political leaders as a tactic. So what's the punishment for that? So I disagree with Congresswoman Waters, and I think she's going to have to come forward and make a decision about how she advances civility. We can't have a contest here over which party is less civil. There's lots of things I could point to that are uncivil about conduct of others. Let us instead agree that we should reject that sort of tactic, and we should be trying to work together across the aisle.
But you're not willing to call for her to apologize or resign?
I'm not going to call for her to resign. I do think that she should be saying that wasn't an appropriate statement, and I'm going to take a different course, and I'll apologize for that.
Senator, thank you. Always good to have you with us. Thanks for being here tonight. You bet. So as we mentioned, my next guest has introduced a measure to censure Maxine Waters. Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs is a Republican and a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Sir, good to have you here this evening. So how far are you going to push this with Maxine Waters?
Well, I think we need to have a floor vote on this, unfortunately. But the reality is I don't have anything personally against Ms. Waters. I just think that her discourse was actually a discredit to the House of Representatives, and that's the measure of whether somebody should be censured. I think she should be responsible for what she said. And maybe that would be the measure that said, we've had some discipline, and maybe now we can set aside some of the overly hot rhetoric that goes back and forth between us.
What do you say to those who say that this starts at the top of the Republican Party and that the president is, likes to say whatever he thinks about individuals and that that's where this started? What do you say to that?
Well, I don't know where it all started, but I know that he didn't call for people who disagreed with him to be harassed 24 hours, 7 days a week, wherever they go, to have people protest outside their houses so they can't get any sleep. Having people say you're not welcome anywhere in this country anymore. I don't think he said that, but that's what Representative Waters was saying.
It's hard to imagine if, I always feel like in order to look at these things, you have to put them in a completely opposite spectrum. Imagine if we were in the middle of the Obama administration and there were calls by a Republican member of Congress to harass cabinet members in the Obama administration everywhere they went and try to make it so that they couldn't go anywhere safely. What do you think the reaction to that would have been?
Well, it wouldn't have been a censure motion. It would have been an expulsion motion. That's what would have happened. And they probably would have gotten it because it is outrageous. It's an outrageous statement. And it puts a lot of people in danger. Look at the situation that we have where you have a Florida congressman's kids were threatened with kidnapping. A man was arrested and charged with that. You have the shooting of Steve Scalise last year. We're in a tinderbox, and I think that you can't be too careful. I mean, I'm all for passion. I'm all for commitment to your principles and debate and discourse, and sometimes it won't be fully civil. But to actually openly ask people to get out and harass people and make sure that they don't feel safe and comfortable simply because they disagree with you on policy, that's wrong.
It seems like grown-ups need to stand up and help solve this problem. And the sort of nexus of the most recent round of this that has escalated to such a frightening degree, as you just pointed out, seems to be what's going on at the border. And I would imagine it's going to be quickly followed suit by the travel ban issue. Can members of Congress get together and come up with something that makes our borders safe and also allows, perhaps the number that the president suggested, DACA children to be able to stay here? Why isn't there some way to solve this immigration problem once and for all so that there's a process that works at the border?
Well, it's obviously a complex issue because we've been fighting with it for the last 100 years. But what I see as a big problem is that we tend to put things in these huge bills where maybe we get Andy to vote for it if we put this in. But if we do that, Joe over here is going to say, no, I can't come on for that. And maybe if we took these at a slice at a time and said, we all tend to agree that we need border security. We need more boots on the ground. We need a fence in places. We need border technology. We need to end the diversity lottery. Maybe if we did some of those things at one-off bills, you might be able to see us get some, in my opinion, some real movement to resolve this very vexing and troublesome issue.
That's why you're all there. So we hope that some headway can be made. Thank you very much, Congressman. Good to see you tonight.
Thanks, Martha. Thank you.
So still ahead, exclusively ours tonight, the Eagles Super Bowl MVP is here with his story of how he beat the GOAT and why he says there are two Nick Foles. Plus a huge win for the White House as the Supreme Court rules in favor of the president's travel ban. But will this decision spark even more protests in America? One of the attorneys general who signed on to support the president's ban faces off against someone who sued to shut it down. Next.
This is a great victory for our Constitution. We have to be tough, and we have to be safe, and we have to be secure. We have to make sure that we vet people coming into the country. We know who's coming in. We know where they're coming from. We just have to know who's coming here.
President Trump offering that simple reaction to the Supreme Court's huge decision earlier today that upheld the so-called travel ban. This is the third version of it, really, in a 5-4 vote. The ruling is considered a win for the president in what has become one of the most controversial issues of his presidency. It has already triggered more lawsuits from states across the country and now protests brewing tonight as well.
This is a dark day for our country, for anybody who cares about checks and balances.
It really hurt for the Hawaii families as well as families all around the country who've been scapegoated or hurt because of President Trump's bullying.
The court was wrong. It's un-American to do what has been done.
All those ugly, bigoted rulings usually find the dustbin, and I think this one will too.
Here now, West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey, who supports the ban and is also running against Democrat Joe Manchin in the Senate race there, and Mike German, a fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice, which represents Muslim Americans impacted by this travel ban. Gentlemen, welcome. Great to have both of you here. Mike, just go back to the president's simple question. We have to know who's coming here. And his argument is that from these 5 countries at this moment, their vetting system isn't effective enough to ensure that they're not allowing people who wish us harm to come.
So as you mentioned, this is the third version.
Yeah.
And he made very clear from the very beginning that his purpose for instituting this policy was to ban Muslims from coming into the United States.
But there's a huge Muslim population, many countries that are not included in this ban.
Absolutely. And
so if he really wanted to do that, he'd have to ban all of them.
Absolutely. This is an ineffective policy. I'm not saying this was an effective way of doing it, but it's ineffective to accomplish what he wants, and also ineffective security. And dozens of national security professionals signed on to an amicus brief acknowledging not just that this would not improve security, but it would actually harm security.
All right, so the president's whole take here, and the Supreme Court ruled that whatever the president said along the way is not an issue to them. They look at the letter of the way this is laid out, and they see it as 5 countries that are on a temporary ban until they can prove that their vetting system works.
Well, I think it's very clear that the president acted within his authority all along, because he has the ability under both the Constitution and the statute to engage in a process to vet aliens that come into the country. And as you properly pointed out, this recent travel ban only had the 5, and there are probably another 45, 50 Muslim countries that were actually not part of that process because their procedures were determined to be strong. The president, I think, has acted consistently all along. The Department of Homeland Security has gone through an extensive vetting process, and the plaintiffs were not able to poke holes in that. This is the right decision. President Trump has stood up for national security, and I think it's a good day for our country.
Mike, you spent, so much of your career trying to keep this country safe. You feel confident that Yemen, for example, has an airtight system of vetting people to make sure that people who want to come here from Yemen or the Sudan, that they aren't here to blow up a building?
I would never argue that there is any country that has a perfect system or anywhere near a perfect system. But if we look at who has actually been a threat to the United States, it's people who have come from England, Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. It's people who have come from other countries that have nothing to do with this ban. So if we're talking about security, let's focus on those very few people who are actually posing a problem and not impose a hardship on the many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are totally innocent that aren't trying to harm America or actually trying to help America.
So your main argument is that it's not effective, that it doesn't make us safer.
The main argument is that it's unconstitutional in that it has a negative impact on our religious liberty and the rights of Americans to have their family members.
The word Muslim is not even in the letter of this.
I think you go back to what we talked about a little bit earlier. A small subset of Muslim countries were actually included. And one thing you're seeing is that if countries get better vetting systems and information sharing, they get removed from the list. So I think that's one of the reasons.
Iraq is the example that was in the original order, is not in this order.
That's right. And that shows thoughtfulness on the part of the executive to make sure that it's implementing the law focused on national security interests. So I think that should be what people talk about today, that this administration is bent over backwards to do this the right way. This is the third iteration. There's no surprise that the Supreme Court upheld what they did today. I think it would have been dramatic if they had actually gone the other way, because if you think about the plaintiff's arguments, they would literally limit the president when you have an epidemic, maybe an Asian flu epidemic or a potential national security risk, which you know is emanating from a country. Their approach would limit the president's authority to protect our nation, and that's not proper.
It's clear that the justices that voted in favor of this went by the words that were in this document and applied them as they saw them. Gentlemen, I got to leave it there. Come back. Thank you so much.
Hey, guys, thanks. And www.patrickmorrissey.com.
You're not going to pull out the hat, are you?
No, not today. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you very much. It's great to have both of you with us tonight. Coming up on a high-stakes primary night, speaking of the election, one of the most hotly contested races in the country is right here in New York, where a former congressman who did 7 months in prison, Michael Grimm, is fighting to reclaim his seat, and he will join me live. Plus, on the eve of FBI agent Peter Strzok's grilling on Capitol Hill tomorrow, Senator Lindsey Graham is demanding answers to 2 specific questions from Rod Rosenstein. He will break that story here next.
They were in charge of the Clinton email investigation. If you trust these two, then you're crazy. Look at the email chain between them.
Was the lead investigator for the FBI in both the Clinton investigation and exoneration and the Russia-Trump campaign investigation. He did the interview of Michael Flynn and others. He will appear behind closed doors with the committees on Capitol Hill. But we are told that this may be just a warm-up and that we can potentially expect him to testify publicly in the near future, so we can all watch his answers to these questions as well. A new piece by Real Clear Investigations, very interesting story, quotes a former FBI agent as saying that he sees that there were 7 attempts, really, by U.S. intelligence and Clinton operatives to essentially entrap members of the Trump campaign. This former agent's name is Mark Walk, and he says, quote, what appear to have been repeated attempts to implicate the Trump campaign in some sort of quid pro quo arrangement with the Russians, who claim to have dirt on Hillary, look like efforts to manufacture evidence against members of the Trump campaign or create pretexts to investigate it. Tomorrow's hearing will drill down on that very central question here. And earlier this evening, I spoke with Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So let's take a look. You are announcing tonight a letter that you wrote to Rod Rosenstein, who is very central to all of this. And in it, we're going to put up on the screen the 2 questions that you would like him to answer. Number 1, did Strzok and Page have any role in retaining or supervising the informant or directing the decision to use the informant? Did Strzok or Page have any such role as to any informant used to investigate the Trump campaign or Trump associates? And number 2, did Strzok or Page have any role in reviewing, approving, or supplying information for the FISA warrant obtained to surveil Carter Page? So, when you put those 2 things together, your letter and that Real Clear Investigations piece, everybody is probing at how this whole thing got started and whether or not it was some form of entrapment.
Well, what we know now is that the person in charge of the Clinton email investigation, Mr. Strzok and Ms. Page, were in the tank for Clinton and hated Trump. Now, did those 2 people start an investigation against the Trump campaign because they had a political bias, or was it based on legitimate evidence? How would you like this guy supervising a confidential informant against the Trump campaign, given his bias and given his dislike for President Trump? He should be the last guy to go to court to get a warrant on anybody associated with the Trump campaign. My question is, what role did they play in the Russian investigation?
And it follows up on their text messages, which, I would imagine he's going to say, look, those are just, I was being funny. I was just kidding around. No, I didn't like the president, but it had no bearing whatsoever on my actions. But they, talk about the insurance policy, and they talk about stopping him. And then, late spring of 2016, all these efforts to try to sort of poke for soft places within members of the campaigns and see if they pick up on this stuff begin, it appears.
Well, here's what's important. July the 31st, they clear Clinton. Now, let me tell you this. If you had done what she had done with her email systems and compromised classified information, you would not have been cleared. So they could not stop Trump if they found her guilty of abusing classified information. So there was no way in hell they were ever going to find Clinton liable if the goal was to stop Trump, because you're giving him the election. Yeah. The question now is about the Russian investigation. Was it a counterintelligence investigation where they were worried about Russia trying to penetrate the Trump campaign. If that's the reason they investigated the Trump campaign, they should have told the Trump campaign, hey, there's some people associated with Russia that you need to be aware of. The fact that they never told the Trump campaign about the investigation is very curious to me.
I agree. That would be a defensive briefing, and there's a very clear mention of the decision not to do a defensive briefing. And, you know, hopefully we're going to get to some of the bottom of some of these questions. John Brennan, who is no fan of the president, has said this: when the special counsel's work is done, the Republican Party must have its modern day equivalents of Watergate heroes, Howard Baker, Elliot Richardson, Bill Ruckelshaus, John Dean, who will put country, fellow citizens, and law above any one person, including Donald Trump. Your thoughts?
The last person I'd received counseling advice from about anything related to Trump would be Brennan. I think Brennan has shown a dislike for the president that questions whether or not he actually was fair as the CIA director. You got to remember that the people that we're looking at here hated Trump, and I think they were all in the tank for Clinton. And we'll see what Mr. Mueller says, but I do know this: the primary investigator when it comes to the Russian-Trump connection early on was Mr. Strzok, who was clearly in the tank for Clinton and hated Trump. I understand why Mueller fired him. I understand why he would fire other people, given their behavior regarding the Trump campaign. So we'll see what Mr. Mueller does, but I'm shocked that nobody in your business, really outside of Fox News, seems to give a damn that the head investigator for the FBI wanted to stop Trump and basically bastardized an investigation of Clinton, had a bias that was beyond belief. Well,
I mean, if there was any attempt to influence the presidential campaign on the part of these individuals, every American should be very, very concerned about that possibility. And if that's not what happened, we should know that too. Senator Lindsey Graham, always good to see you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, coming up next, remember this moment?
Let me be clear to you. You have to do that to me again. I'll turn you over. Like a boy.
Oh, that was a high point. Remember that? Former Congressman Michael Grimm is now in a heated battle to reclaim his seat in Congress from the man who replaced him. He will join me live exclusively next as the polls are about to close. Also tonight, even though he beat my team, Nick Foles is here to talk about how he did it. And now that Carson Wentz is healthy, will the MVP of the Super Bowl be a backup quarterback? Coming up next.
The big point of my career was a couple years ago when I was going to step away. It was a time for me to step back and reflect on just the journey of my life and, you know, what God has done in my life. And, you know, it was really humbling.
So it is election night again. We're keeping a close eye on the primary races out there in 7 states this evening, with the balance of power in Congress up for grabs. One of them right here in New York, where the bitter congressional race between 2 Republicans has gotten national attention, between President Trump's endorsed candidate Dan Donovan and former Congressman Michael Grimm, who is fighting to take back his seat. Here now exclusively in his only one-on-one interview until the results are called later, New York Republican congressional candidate Michael Grimm. Good to see you. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me on, Martha.
So, you know, it's interesting to look at your recent history. I mean, it's been well documented. You've talked a lot about the fact that you spent 7 months in prison for tax evasion. I know that you feel that that conviction was that you were railroaded, that it was unjust. But when you look at it from a political perspective, Don Blankenship had a similar experience. He spent some time in jail, felt that it was completely wrong. It did not turn out working well for him. Why will you be different?
Well, I think that the people of Staten Island and Brooklyn, they got to know me personally. No one does constituent services the way I did, whether it was Superstorm Sandy or rebuilding the marina, bringing money home for our hospitals. People got to know me on a personal level, and I don't think they like the political corruption getting into our justice system. You have to understand, I had 3 delivery boys off the books at a restaurant. In the entire history of the city of New York, everyone else was given a civil fine by the Department of Labor. I'm the only one in history that was actually criminally charged for that. And people are rejecting that. They don't like that.
Yeah, so you have said, you know, or people have said in talking about you that you're more Trump than Trump. Why do you think he didn't endorse you? Why did he endorse your opponent?
Well, I think that's obvious. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of pressure put on a president by the establishment that, you know, controls the House, leadership and so on. They don't want the president going against their incumbents. And ultimately, the president needs the team that's in office now to pass his agenda. So it would be very difficult for the president, I think, to go against the sitting incumbents unless there was an extremely good reason. So that, to me, it's really not a surprise at all.
What's your take on what's happening at the border? Do you think that it's wrong that those families have been separated? Are you worried about those kids?
Well, what I think is wrong is that we're not worried about all 12,000. Right now, I really think the left is only playing this up because it looks like it hurts our president. But the fact is, how about the other 10,000 that came by themselves? How about when they were ripped out of their mother's arms in Guatemala or Honduras or wherever they came from, and then stuffed in a trunk, some of them, to cross the desert by, smugglers and coyotes. So I think if we want to care about children, we have to close our borders once and for all so that they never make that journey in the first place, because that journey, which is so dangerous and often ends in rape and being sold through human trafficking and other egregious things, if we really care about them, then we have to close our borders once and for all so they never make that horrific journey.
How about running against Max Rose is an Army veteran. He would be the Democrat. If you do win tonight, that's who you would run against. How are you going to run against him?
Well, I'm just curious why you would say that. They have a primary tonight, and the last time I checked, we still have well over an hour left before the polls close. So we don't know who the Democrat is going to be. But whoever it is, I'm going to run exactly the way I've always ran. You got to understand, I've won 4 elections for one reason, because I work my tail off. I'm relentless. I go out there, I meet the people, I talk about the issues, I get to know them, and I make sure they get to know me. And again, I think that hard work is exactly why we're probably poised to win by a big margin tonight.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. We'll see what happens. And as you say, the outcome is still a ways away, and we'll report it as soon as we get the news. Thank you very much. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you, Martha.
So here now with more, Tom Bevan, co-founder and publisher of Real Clear Politics. Tom, good to see you tonight. How do you think that New York race is looking? And I made the Don Blankenship comparison. Very similar in terms of the way that they tried to put themselves in office and to put the past behind them. What do you think?
Yeah, and similar that Trump came out, he didn't actually say vote against Michael Grimm like he tweeted against Don Blankenship, but obviously endorsed Dan Donovan. Look, it's going to be, I think Dan Donovan is probably going to win this race, but we'll see. I mean, in this day and age, it's hard to count anybody out. It's a primary, hard to poll. Anything can happen. So we'll have to wait and see. But certainly, this is the only Republican district in the city. It's a district that voted by Staten Island, correct, all of Staten Island, parts of Brooklyn, and voted for Trump by 10 points in 2016. So Republicans will definitely have the upper hand, regardless of who the Democrats nominate heading into November in this district.
One Republican district in New York is pretty amazing. Okay, Mitt Romney is also in the race tonight, and he has a primary race that he's hoping to win this evening. Let's listen to this soundbite from an interview that he did earlier today.
I think it's very likely that the president will face a competitor in 2020. Don't know who that'll be, maybe multiple people. But I think given the support he has in the party, it's very likely that he would be selected as a Republican nominee again.
What do you make of that, Tom?
Well, I don't think Mitt was talking about himself, to be clear. But yeah, it's interesting. Look, this is the return of Mitt Romney. He's running tonight because he didn't get the state 60% at the state party convention, which is a bit of a bump in the road for him. But looks like he's poised to win tonight, and that would obviously make him almost assure him of being the next senator from Utah. I don't think Mitt has any presidential aspirations, but Mitt might be right that someone might run against Trump. Mitt is probably also right that it's likely a suicide mission because Trump has a real grip on the party right now, has high standing among Republican voters.
Yeah, 90% approval in the Republican Party. Very interesting to see how that's going to play out. Good to see you tonight, Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Martha.
Coming up next, Super Bowl MVP Nick Foles is standing right here in the Story studio. So how did he beat Tom Brady? He shares the secret sauce coming up next.
Through prayer, through studying the Word, through my relationship with my wife and family, I wouldn't be up here without them, without God.
So my next guest went from being backup quarterback, considering retirement, to this year's Super Bowl most valuable player, leading the Philadelphia Eagles to victory over Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. Ouch. And he is sharing his story in his new book, Believe It, my journey of success, failure, and overcoming the odds. Here now exclusively on The Story tonight, quarterback Nick Foles. Nick, it is so good to see you, and congratulations.
Thank you.
From me and all the Patriots fans and members of Patriots Nation. Everybody respects what you did
I
that
appreciate
in
it.
that game.
I know that takes a lot.
And
so
yeah, believe me.
I know, hey, takes a lot to say that, so I appreciate it.
So you belong to an elite club of quarterbacks who have Super Bowl rings, and an even smaller club who have beaten Tom Brady in a Super Bowl, you and Eli Manning. So my question for you, when you walked in there that night, did you sense that team was vulnerable, that he was vulnerable, that you could beat him after the hand injury and everything else that week?
Yeah, it was more so just from what I knew we had in the locker room, just with the guys throughout the season, the adversity we had faced as a team. Going against the Patriots, one of the, if not the greatest franchise of all time, I mean, that's who you want to go against. Tom Brady, Belichick, that's who you want to face. So, you know, preparing for the game with my teammates, I was really confident. We played with a lot of swag, a lot of energy.
Sure did.
If you see in the locker room, a lot of dancing, so we were ready to play.
Yeah, I was there that night. I have to say, when you guys walked out, you could feel the energy. You could feel how pumped up you guys were. And I was worried from the very first second of the game. I got to ask you this. You know, Tom Brady tried to catch a pass and run it in for a touchdown. He failed. Shortly later, you tried to do the same thing, and you succeeded. Did you do that to kind of rub it in a little bit?
You know, it does appear that way, and I know that, you know, Eagles fans will probably use it. But no, honestly, we had the Philly special in the game plan weeks prior, and we were going to use it in the Super Bowl one way or the other. And it just so happened that they tried to play a couple plays before we did, and it, you know, if anything, it reminded me, hey, make sure I look it all the way in. And you know, once we executed it, the Philly special came to life.
You made it look easy, and it was a great play that I don't think anybody will ever forget. Malcolm Butler was not put in the game by Coach Belichick, and a lot of Patriots fans believe that was one of the real vulnerabilities for them that night. Were you surprised that he wasn't in?
You know, I was so into the game. You know, we've played against so many DBs. I've never really worried about the DBs too much. Butler's a great player. He plays with. He's very physical at the line. He's got a great skill set. So, I mean, I guess you're a little bit surprised, but at the same time, I'm not really focused on that. I mean, I'm not worried about what they're doing. I'm just going to go out there, play, recognize their coverage, and trust my receivers to, you know, beat the DBs and beat them off the ball, beat them in their routes. And I got to expect, you know, to put the ball on the money every single time. And that was my mindset in the game. I wasn't really dwelling on him not playing, though, you know, he's a tremendous player. And watching him on film, he was going to be a great matchup. Yeah,
I mean, you played so relaxed and so smooth. And I wonder, you know, you've had a lot of adversity, as you point out in your book. You almost quit the game a couple of years before you won the Super Bowl. So how do you get there? You say there's two Nick Foles, and you needed to separate them. What does that mean?
You know, I think that sometimes we get an identity in what we do, and it's not really who we are. It's a part of who we are. I think my identity as an athlete, you're treated based on how you play. So if you have a good game, you know, sometimes you're treated better. If you have a bad game, you know, everyone's afraid to talk to you. And I think that eventually wears on you. And you don't want to be treated as what your stats say. You want to be treated as the person. And, you know, dealing with that throughout my career and, you know, facing that battle, you know, that's been ongoing. I think it finally came, you know, to that climax in St. Louis, to where after that season I had lost the joy of the game and I needed to step back a little bit. And ultimately I decided that I was going to step away from the game, and I thought that's what was best. And it was the best thing to just take a breath and breathe. And then, you know, I was really facing the fear going back to the game because it had sort of entrapped me. I didn't want to touch a football. I didn't want to play again. And, you know, a Texas boy saying that, who grew up, you know, touching a football the first day he's born, it's really hard. So you love something your entire life, and all of a sudden you lose it. But, you know, the joy came back. You know, I prayed about it with my wife, and, you know, a lot of tears were shed. But I played for Andy Reid, his entire staff, and that Kansas City team helped me get the joy and love of the game back.
You talk a lot about God and about your faith. How does that sustain you?
Yeah, I mean, I gave my life to Christ as a freshman at Michigan State. I knew who Christ was growing up, but I didn't really give my life to him until that year, until basically, you know, I had my shoulder repaired. I was at Michigan State, you know, thousands of miles away from home, from Texas. And, you know, I was going through a lot with football once again, and just being in school and college and everything that goes along with it. And I would say that through the trials, through the ups and downs, just leaning on Christ, leaning on God's word through prayer, you know, never for prosperity, never for that. I know that when I'm going through trial, God's always trying to teach me something and allow me to grow. And I can tell you that through the ups and downs, my heart's continued to shape even more so. You know, a big thing throughout my career was my wife getting sick with dysautonomia, POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So that's been a trial that's been in our life, but it's grown us closer together. She's resilient, she's amazing, and now she's got a platform to really spread awareness for POTS. It was awesome.
Beautiful family. No doubt that kind of experience gives you perspective on life.
Absolutely.
What's important. In terms of next season, is Carson Wentz healthy? Are you going to be the backup? What do you expect?
I expect Carson to get a full recovery, be ready to go. I don't know when. I'm going to let the doctors do this thing. He needs to get healthy. I'm a big fan of him. He's a tremendous player. He's going to have a great career. I'm excited to, be in Philly for this next year, to be a part of this team. It's a great atmosphere. I'll be the backup quarterback, probably the first quarterback ever in Super Bowl history to do this.
That's amazing, right? I mean, you win a Super Bowl and you come back and you've got the ring and you think you'll be backup.
Carson Wentz, arguably going to be the MVP last year. He's a great player. We have such a stacked quarterback room with, Nate Sudfeld, Joe Callahan. The room is stacked. It's a great group of guys. Nate's going to have an opportunity. Joe's going to have an opportunity to play. They're both tremendous players, and it's just a very unique situation in Philadelphia right now.
All right, stick around 1 second because our resident Eagles fan, Jesse Waters, is going to join us coming up next. Before we say goodbye, we'll be right back. Jersey that I had to wear the Eagles jersey after the Super Bowl, but I did it with my Patriots hat on. Nick Foles is back with us, the most valuable player, and there's Jesse. And Jesse, you owe me big time now,
this
right?
Is huge.
Not only did they
so
win, but I invited you to sit here with Nick Foles
I know,
tonight.
this is great. Although the audience doesn't know this, you tried to injure him. When he was going around for a picture, you pulled some cables out, tried to trip him. Dirty Patriots.